what those guys were. But
She the riots of all time. This is the 1967 Detroit 1967 riots. This would look like, this was a picture of downtown Detroit. This was the Crown Heights riot. This was in August of 1991. This was due to a Jewish leader, Rabbi Gavin and Anglo Cato, the Guyanese immigrants killing the former children of Guyanese and long-standing tension between the Jews and African Americans, leading to a 3-day riot and one murder and more than 100 people arrested. So this was the Crown Heights riot of about 1991. This was the 2016 Charlotte riot. Everybody remember that one about, actually it's African American man Lamont Scott killed by police, a riot, and due to 3 days of riot clashes between demonstrators and police. Deployed tear gas and bullets. New York City draft riots. The New York City draft riots from July 13 to 16, 1863 remained the largest, most catastrophic civil disturbance in history of the United States. Working classes of men upset wealthier men could play their way out of the intimate civil war. Slaves freed by the proclamation that would take their jobs and lash out. Authorities running the draft as well as African Americans throughout the city, while complete account estimate around available historians agree that while 100 people died, 2,000 people suffered injuries. This is in American history, everybody. This is in New York City. This was in 1863. Harlem Riot, 1864. Harlem, following the 16-year-old African American jail, police Harlem Riot of 1964. The 1992 LA riots, Los Angeles riots of, again, a high profile case. Anybody remember this one? About an African American named Rodney King. Now not realizing the nail was videotaping, and it showed the riot. I recall some of these. This one, and people were tearing stuff up. 55 people killed, injured 2,000 people, more than 11,000 people were in handcuffs. San Francisco State strike, and this was started in 1968. Students of the San Francisco State College, largest state university, American history, lack of ethnic diversity, both offer phonetically here. When police called in, the clash between them students were turned violent, while the episode turned home in countries violent. In ethnic study programs, most universities ran today. So 1960.
At the streets and violence, destruction, 26 people dead, hundreds injured, and more than 1,000 arrests. Let me see. This was the Haymarket Street riot. Perhaps this is the demonstration of American history of main rise throughout the Haymarket Street. 1886. Pitted protesters against Chicago police, a bloody clash that left 11 people dead and more than 100 people injured. And it became a workers' vote campaign on 8-hour work and protest recent killings of workers by the police. One threw a bomb at the police attempting to quell the disorder. Violence erupted. This was from 1886. Was mentioned about that one. With the National Guard and cracked down the American flag. This happened 52 years ago. Okay. The Memphis Rise, 1866. One of the most restriction era fueled by tensions between newly freed slaves and white immigrants competing over jobs, housing, and a particular bloody incident. 1866 was likely to be known as the massacre. Angry at African American Union soldiers patrolling through the city, scores of Memphians, whites, including many Irish immigrant police, roamed the city 3 days, robbing, assaulting, and killing many African Americans they could find. Ultimately, 46 lie dead, while 90 African American homes, 12 African American schools, and 4 African American churches were set in ruins. 1866. Ferguson. This right out in Missouri. That was back 5 years ago. 1968, Washington, D.C. riots. April 4, 1960, James Earl assassinated Martin Luther King, Memphis, Tennessee, in the days in which followed. This devastated demonstrators in more than 100 cities hit the streets, a wave of rioting. Nation's history, city's heart capital. Washington, D.C., 1,000 were injured, 600,000 people, 6,000 people was arrested. 1968 Pittsburgh riots. Arsonists set 500 fires. Authorities were forced to use the National Guard.
Asteroids. This was a 19th century New York City.
And pop-ups. It was see growing immigrant populations against novelists sought to keep their immigrants out. This is about immigrants. Among the deadliest of these riots was Astor Price riot in 1849 between the British actor William Charles McKinley and an American one in Florence. Tapped at the house deeper resentment between the Anglophile upper classes and American lower class immigrants. These resentments came to a head. 10,000 showed up to the theater and McGreedy performance on 1910, killing several dozen.
Until 1945, but in 1933, the throes of the Great Depression upset and wait another decade with receiving their money. 17,000 veterans and another 26,000 more in Washington, D.C. to end up the camp the government properties. The government responded by calling thousands of soldiers and policemen, just like they did today. Only thing they didn't have tanks at that time. Regarding the classes of 1,000 injured veterans are still without their bonuses. So they had this problem back then. Red Summer, white, with mass killings, summer across different the river, 19 the most ways of violence. Nearly 300 nationwide through the summer and early fall.
This is a black man that they burned. The Orange Riots in 1870 between New York's relatively upper class and deeply rooted Irish Protestants, relatively low class arriving Irish Catholics came to the head, and a latter group attacked the former parade in following July. Despite failed government attempts to prevent such chaos, again, the violence was even worse. Militiamen, police, civilians clashed for hours, with more than 60 ultimately ended up dead. So you have militiamen and civilians clashed in 1870.
September 1961, few dozen of nearly 100 African Americans were killed by local whites. Amid contents of growing white resentment toward African men over increasing share of job market, political power, whites became more outraged becoming the newspaper because 4 white women began being sexually assaulted allegedly by African American men. Violence ensued until militia was able to restore order, but not before the corpus damage was done. So this was based on falsification of 4 white women back in 1906. Here's the paper back at that time of Clayton. This was a race war. The race war has been going on all this time. This is nothing new. Along with blood. Here it is, Columbia University, 1968.
Groups one rebelling against Columbia's plans for a segregated gym and encroachment into Harlem. The other against Columbia recently revealed connections into the Department of Defense, available weapons, think tank, battlefield with students, counter-protesters, and police. The police eventually moved with tear gas to put an end to the unrest. This was in 1968. 68 was that was the year I was born. Man, he was doing a lot of stuff during 1968. Okay, anyway, the Chinese massacre. It was the largest mass lynching in American history on April 24, 1871, with anti-Chinese demonstrations. A high mob, some 500, entered Los Angeles Chinatown in search of accidentally death of a local. So this was something. See, America got a history, man. Don't let people tell you that, oh, no, it was founded on violence. Here it is.
The Boston Massacre, among the most well-known civil disturbances in U.S. history. The Boston Massacre of March 5th, 1770, pitted the British soldiers against the colonial revolutionaries, and one key was precipitated a incident and run up the Revolutionary War. The trouble began when several colonists upset unpopular legislation taxation from British Parliament surrounding the British sentry station aimed at save the restore order. Agitated soldiers fired the crowd and 5 wounded others. Leading patriots Paul
was partially responsible for the famous engraving here. And mindset instance of the fever of colonies thus ordering the course of American history forever. So this was the Boston Massacre.
Again, a violent time on American shores. The 2015 riots. As police pitted violence against African Americans made headlines in cities across the U.S. The Baltimore police under fire in 2015 over the death of 25-year African American man named Freddie Gray, who died spinal injury sustained from police. Following the Gray's death in April 19, the city went under a state of emergency. Protesters clashed with police, looting stores, setting fires over 2 weeks. The aftereffects spread through which saw the highest number of murders reported in his Baltimore. This was in 2015.
In 1937, the Malay Massacre. On 1837, striking laborers as the Steppers Organic Company marched toward the Chicago public stadium of time refused contract with the police blocked their path. The Conference Station soon grew violent, with police fatally shooting 10, permanently disabling 9, wounding dozens of others.
So this was a union. The Stonewall Rise. New York Stonewall Rise. A lot of people probably remember this one from the movie. June 1969 are the good reason organizers inside a member of the gay rights movement upset a regular police raids at Stonewall Inn, an LGBT bar in Greenwich Village. Patrons reacted violently to police inclusion that occurred in the early morning hours on June 20th. The crowd hurled and lit fires and brawled with police at that night. Soon the gay rights movement
had from activist groups ushered into full force. So this is to the courthouse rise of 1884, struggling with the time of rising result from political corruption, poor labor conditions. Cincinnati was fed up with widespread injustice at the time, and despite overwhelming evidence to return to a murder verdict of the infamous case on March 26, 1884, a mob strength would reach 10,000, storm the jail, search for a serial killer on March 28. Despite hundreds of police and militiamen jail rioters managed to destroy the courthouse along with the blockade, as well as carry out a wave of arson, looting the storm. This is what they did. This is in 1884. This is what they did. Boston Tea. With the representation of policy of colonially of the whole demonstration began with a group of men destroying shipment British tea, tossing it off its ship into the harbor. The British responded with acts of ending Massachusetts self-government, hastening the coming of the revolution. So this was the Boston Tea. Okay. And here we go. Here's this one. We want white tenants in our white community. This was the Detroit race rise. As America leaped into War II, the incident around Detroit became essential. The war effort drawing 400,000 immigrants, both white and African American, from the South between 1941 and 1943. The jobs thus became scarce as the city became crowded. Racial tensions soared as whites sought to keep African Americans out of their neighborhoods. Finally, on June 20, 1943, fueled by false rumors of racially motivated attacks on malls, of poor from both races began clashing with police and each other. The fighting lasted 3 days, left 34 people dead, many African Americans at the hands of police. 1934. 1860, riot of 1860, yet another Reconstruction era, fueled by white fear of resentment of newly freed African Americans in power that could hold the New Orleans riot of July 30, 1860 saw a killing of 44 African American marchers to the Louisiana Constitution. 1917. Ever since the primary African American 24th Infantry Regiment camped at Camp Logan in the segregated city of Houston, they faced hostility. Things turned violent on April 23, 1917, when two Houston police officers assaulted two African Americans of the regiment. Soon, the entire regiment marched into Houston, killing 16 people, including 4 policemen. We considered stopping their charge. The regiment leader, Bidia Henry, killed himself that night with facing execution order actions. 41 received life sentence at a pension trial. This was the picture of these black men at this trial in 1917. There was at least 3 dead and 2 Catholic churches destroyed. The Tulsa race riot. After World War I, as a Tulsa, Oklahoma, whites sought to maintain dominance over the segregated city's upwardly mobile black population's tensions soared. On May 21, 1921, with a rumor circulating that a young black man had sexually assaulted a young white woman, a mob of white men took to the streets looking for the vengeance, caused scores of black men to fight back. Over the next 2 days, the city became a veritable war zone, with gunfights and fires destroying more than 35 city blocks. For a 300 estimate wireless of Oklahoma businesses. In the post-revolutionary New York City, it was common for doctors and medical students to rob the graves of slaves and poor whites in order to procure cadavers. In April 1788, when several children witnessed medical student John Hicks in New York hospital pictured doing the very thing, and the mob eventually grew to 2,000 strong, stormed the hospital, forced many of the city's doctors into hiding, and did the battle between the militiamen called in to restore order, ultimately leaving as many as 20 dead. Look at Watts riots. The most widespread destructive riots in U.S. history. Los Angeles in of 1965. After the violent public arrest of 2 young African American men and their mother following a scuffle with the police in August 11. Between 31,000 and 35,000 people took to the streets in a riot that left 34 dead, 1,332 people injured, 3,438 arrests, and $40 million worth of property damage. And that is, I believe that's it. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, America always had racism that goes back to the 1700s. It was always political racism, because as you see, Tea Party, it was always racial riots, and you see what happened. It happened in Washington D.C. on occasions. when things happen. This ain't the first time this happened, and it's always been riots in America. So anybody see this give you the brief history. You know, there's always been bloodshed, and that's why I say as far as political things, and racial and things dealing with unions and pay and the fear of immigrants at that time, like we do now. But they would literally go out, they attack people, Chinese, and mostly you see with African Americans, these white people would go and just, they believe that they were taking their jobs. So this racial stuff has been festering over time. It's been festering for a long time. This is something that has not started. It's been around for a while, and it's time that this country really faced the facts. And it was there all enough, and a lot of jealousy, resentment. It's basically because they feel like they have more going on, or this. So what they would do back in that time, when it came attacking the African American black people in those eras, they were doing well, so they would start something by making an accusation that it would clash, like someone beat up somebody or they raped some white woman. That would trigger things off, and that would give them an excuse to feel like, well, they're attacking us. And that was the race riots, the union riots, as you see, with fair wages and stuff, the political riots, and what you see now in Washington D.C. America has always had this issue, have always shed bloodshed, always. People say, well, is it getting out? It's see over a period of time in the 80s, 90s, in the 20s, from back then. Look at each era, all the way back 1700s, all to the 20th century. Continue having change, and people think that it's something it's a spirit that's over the land. That is and basically it is an evil spirit that over the American land that has always done this. That's just the riots. That's not including probably other stuff that's happened. That's sparked off from, as you see, some was from Civil War era and things. And people I show this because this is a history, and people say, and you see how history, people think, well, that still is the past. But have you noticed that in every century, every decade, from the 18th century to the 21st century, it's never changed. And you see, like, I know certain people still get that ancient, and that's what I mean in this ancient hate towards particular groups of people. One is black people. All the police. It's called explosive. Here it comes. The explosive riots that changed the course of American history. I want to show you this. That's what it is. But it's always been here.
that over the centuries, over time. But over time, it has always been here. It always, I'm sorry, excuse me. It has always been here. But yeah, racism has always been a part of the American fabric. Injustice, rioting, looting, killing. It's a lot of bloodshed. A lot of bloodshed that this country has shed in the borders of this country. That's not including overseas. But a lot of injustice. So I hope you guys
Got a chance to see that nothing new under the sun. Nothing.
Um,
Nothing's new under the sun. That's the way it is here. Racism, a lot of stuff with politics, race, thing with politics, race, and it was mostly around jobs and insecurity that the immigrants gonna come take our jobs. So we got to get together. We got to retaliate against them, to beat them up. And that you see that, and this happened between the blacks and the whites. They were Americans. This happened in America. It's always been that black versus white clash when it comes that long too, since come out of slavery. So this stuff is nothing new. So the racial thing is still,
we of young stuff this has happened, and that's 37 of the riots that happened in America.
But it's something really. It was real eye-opening when I seen it. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But yeah. So, this is something that I thought that dropped, but I hope you get a good idea about time, how things repeat itself, and how it never. That's why what I said in prior videos is like it'll never go away until basically and God step on this earth. And in the 21st century, people, more stuff is going to unfortunately rise. Because if one party take a party,
you had passed in Washington D.C. where
it could turn into a full-out war. And you see was militiamen back then in the 1700s, and policemen, militiamen, and they had a National Guard. History always repeats itself. Always repeats itself. So I hope this was an informative video. I'm going to try to make some more informative videos. Concentrate on why is it that this keeps happening. And for someone who's young, or someone who don't know, that I thought this is over. No, the spirit of it is still in the land. It's still going on and on and on. Spirit of envy, insecurity, of ego, come take away things. A lot of it to do with
the politics and the people and the people. And not doing the people pay the price. And it was deadly. it was really, really something to see. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that. Hope you, till next time, you guys take care. And be blessed.